Well, to the defense minister now, as he found himself defending his department's spending plans today, not only answering questions to the Defense Committee about the revised strategy for D&D, but also answering questions about a letter sent by nearly 24 U.S. senators. All of those senators expressed profound disappointment in Canada's failure to meet NATO's 2% of GDP spending threshold. As they note, the commitment would only amount to 1.76% of GDP by the end of the decade, even with the Trudeau government's intention to invest billions. Take a listen now to Bill Blair and how he responded to the criticism.
I was down in Washington 2 weeks ago. I met with the Secretary of Defense. I met with a number of other legislators there as well. And when we talked about Canada's new investment in defense, I think they were very encouraged by it. But in particular, and I don't like to quote him, he speaks well for himself, but the commander of NORAD has talked a lot very publicly about the nearly $40 billion Canada is investing in NORAD modernization, the acquisition of new capabilities, new capital equipment as part of that. And frankly, with the introduction of our new defense policy, again, he was very supportive and even complimentary to the work that we are doing. I think that it's important as well. We acknowledge in our own defense policy update, we're doing a great deal. We have more to do. We're going to do more. But when you're spending taxpayer dollars, you got to do it right. You got to do it well.
Well, to talk about that letter from U.S. senators, we're now joined by retired Lieutenant General Tom Lawson. From 2012 to 2015, he served as Canada's Chief of Defense Staff. General Lawson, good to see you again. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Listen, over the weekend, we heard the U.S. ambassador, and I guess he changed his tune a bit about Canada's NATO commitment because, just a few weeks ago, he said the U.S. is generally happy with the direction they see Canada headed. But in an interview with Global News, Ambassador Cohen this weekend now describes Canada as the outlier in NATO, not one of the outliers, but the outlier on defense spending and failing to have a path to get to that 2% of GDP. I'm wondering, General, what are the implications of that for Canada?
Well, it sounds like the ambassador is maybe working off a new memo that came in over the weekend that's more in line with where the letter from the 23 senators is. I mean, you have to feel for the Canadian government, who really for decades has taken a deep discount in defense, and it really didn't matter too much to our chief allies, largely the Americans to the south, but even our allies in NATO. Everybody recognized that geographically, Canada is well separated from any threats. But that's all changed. And I'm not sure the government was ready for that. That's changed in that geography really doesn't matter nearly as much as the fact that all of these world systems that help provide the wonderful things that we've got and Western nations have in their economy and to live by are all under threat now. So simply having oceans protecting you and friends to the south isn't good enough. And our allies want to know if Canada's serious about defense.
Now, as you noted there, Canada hasn't really kept up to pace in terms of proportionality with the United States when it comes to defense investments. And before becoming CDS, you also served as Deputy Commander of NORAD. So I'm wondering if there were at that time already frustrations being expressed about the investment or lack thereof coming from Canada.
No, not at all. And it always surprised me, even when I was down there as deputy commander, but even in past years when I was posted to Europe and internationally to the United States, that we weren't really under the gun. And I think it was this acceptance that Canada wasn't like the other NATO allies. We were way over across an ocean. We were on the west flank of NATO. But, oh boy, every other one of our NATO allies would have liked to be in the same position of a very low threat. And the Americans never expected much more from the United States than allowing them to fly in airspace for the decades ever since NORAD was stood up. So we were even then, even 10 years ago when I was Chief of Defense, we were being excused in a way that has seemingly come to an end.
come to an end, as you say. And, you know, part of the reason why defense has essentially not been invested in as much is because when it comes to the ballot box, it really hasn't been much of a priority for Canadians. So, you know, you alluded to how the environment, the threat environment has changed for this country. What do you say to Canadians now who are still on the fence or not convinced that there needs to be more investment, criticism from U.S. senators or not?
Right. So, you know, surveys show that more and more Canadians believe that investing in defense is where we need to go. You know, even a decade ago, it would have been a hard argument to put defense high on the list when seniors and healthcare and housing and so many other things were there. And although there's been movement and a lot more Canadians understand how our standard of living is tied into the defense of Western systems under attack all around the world, a lot of others really aren't there. So the government's in a tough place. I think what the government has to do is convince Canadians that we need to meet this academic requirement to show that we're serious about defense and get to 2%. Not the 4% gross domestic product that the Americans are investing or the 2.5% that the UK is investing, but 2%, significantly up from the 7.6 that we're supposed to be at the end of this decade. And the government's going to have to do it while bringing along these Canadians who have never really seen defense to be a priority. And I think there are ways to do that.
Okay, ways to do that. But, you know, before we get there, what are the implications here, though, General? If we don't actually meet this 2%, what are the implications for Canada?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they could be as serious as this. If President Trump is elected again and carries through with some of his more radical ideas regarding NATO, we may see a unilateral withdrawal for simple reasons that other nations, along with Canada, have not kept up as they were supposed to. More likely not a withdrawal, but perhaps a two-tier NATO in which if you haven't ponied up your 2%, there is no guarantee by Article 5, that historical article in NATO's constitution, that one for all and all for one if someone's attacked. But really, even when we go short of these really significant, earth-shattering type things with that alliance, we see that around the world, Canada is seen to be a laggard and not really focused seriously on defense. Therefore, we're not being asked to take part in those really important things that we always were, the alliances, Five Eyes, sharing of information, that AUKUS that's been stood up with Australia, the UK, the United States. Those are things that we're not being asked to be part of anymore, simply because people have accepted the fact that Canada is not serious about defense.
General, quickly running out of time, but you mentioned being able to reach that goal more easily. What do you have in mind there? If you can say that quickly, please.
Well, yes. I mean, quite simply, if we were to develop a program, a really expensive program to purchase a fleet of subs, nuclear or conventional powered, then very quickly we would be at 2%. There are other ways to do it, systems for air defense and things like that. But I think there are ways where a lot of that money can stay in Canada. Refurbish the bases that we do have, and there's billions of refurbishment required because we've long allowed buildings on our wings and at our ports and our bases to languish. Fill the parts bins to get our ships sailing with more frequency, our aircraft flying with more frequency, and our tanks driving with more frequency. And then invest in those empty positions across the armed forces by really becoming competitive for young men and women in Canada to consider defense as a career for the future. So up the pay. It's pretty good right now. Up it to it's really good, and all that money stays in Canada.
General Lawson, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Michael.